I am Julian. I am 35 years old. 4 years ago, my own brother and my wife looked me in the eye and casually destroyed my life. We were sitting at my father's birthday dinner, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me the most, when they announced they had been carrying on a physical affair for 6 solid months. In that exact moment, while my entire world was collapsing and I was desperately looking for a lifeline from the people who raised me, my parents made a choice. My father looked right at me and told me to stop acting like a child and accept reality. My mother rushed over, wrapped her arms around my cheating wife, and comforted her. They laughed at my pain, they humiliated me in front of the whole family, and they chose the golden child over me just like they always did. But there was one thing they didn't know. They had no idea that their blind favoritism was going to cost them absolutely everything. They had no idea that one day, I would be the corporate executive holding the absolute power to liquidate their entire financial existence. And right now, they are begging on their knees for a second chance they will never get. Before I tell you exactly how I brought my own family's empire crashing down, please hit that like button if you believe in true justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. The destruction of a life rarely happens with a massive cinematic explosion. It does not happen in one clean break. It happens slowly. It is a quiet decay, like black mold seeping into the wooden foundation of a house, until one day the floor simply gives way beneath your feet. It started with incredibly small things. A lingering glance across the living room. A hushed conversation in the kitchen that abruptly stopped the second I walked in to get a glass of water. A heavy, twisting feeling in the pit of my stomach that I constantly told myself was just stress from working 80-hour weeks at the family business. I was married to Clara. We had a beautiful, sprawling home in the upscale suburbs. We had a solid real estate investment portfolio we were building for our future children. I was the guy who did absolutely everything by the book. I paid the mortgage on time, I mowed the lawn every single Saturday morning, and I contributed heavily to my retirement accounts so we would never have to worry about money. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I provided enough security and stability, I would finally be valued. I remember the exact evening the illusion shattered. It was a crisp, biting October night. The air smelled strongly of dry leaves and wood smoke, that classic Midwestern autumn smell that usually brought me a deep sense of comfort. It was my father Victor's 60th birthday. I had spent the entire afternoon at the family hardware and construction supply business, sorting out a massive, expensive inventory mess that my younger brother Felix had caused through sheer negligence. I was completely exhausted. My lower back ached. My eyes were burning from staring at inventory spreadsheets for 9 hours, and my formal suit felt like a straitjacket. But I pushed through because that is what a good, responsible son does. I arrived at my parents' house a little late. They lived in a highly exclusive, gated community. My mother, Beatrice, was the president of their local neighborhood board, and she ruled the community with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Appearance was everything to her. I parked my car in their wide, perfectly paved circular driveway and walked up to the heavy oak front door. I expected the usual loud, chaotic chatter, the rich smell of my mother's famous roasted lamb, and the clinking of expensive crystal wine glasses. I even had a vintage $300 bottle of bourbon wrapped under my arm, a gift that cost me a decent chunk of my personal salary just to earn a brief, dismissive nod of approval from my father. When I pushed the front door open, the house was dead silent. I paused in the grand foyer. Normally, my mother would be bustling around the kitchen, barking frantic orders at the hired caterers or fussing over the placement of the linen napkins. Normally, my father would be holding court in the living room, talking loudly and arrogantly about the stock market or his latest golf game. But there was absolutely nothing, just a heavy, suffocating silence that made the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. I walked slowly into the formal dining room. The scene looked like a twisted oil painting, frozen in time. The heavy mahogany table was set perfectly. The crystal glasses caught the warm light from the overhead chandelier. My father sat at the head of the table. He was wearing his usual tailored charcoal suit, but his face was completely unreadable, a stone wall. My mother was seated next to him, her hands nervously clutching her linen napkin in her lap. Her knuckles were stark white from the pressure. Across from them sat my brother Felix. He was leaning back in his chair, tapping his heavy silver fork against the edge of his china plate, a faint, incredibly arrogant smirk playing on his lips. And right next to him was Clara, my wife. She was wearing the dark green silk dress I had bought her for our anniversary 2 months prior. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but she was not crying. She just looked incredibly cold. She looked like a complete stranger. I stood at the entrance of the room, holding the expensive bottle of bourbon, and asked if everything was okay. I asked if somebody had died or if there had been an accident. Nobody answered. The silence in that room was so incredibly heavy it felt like the air pressure was crushing my lungs. I looked directly at Clara. I took a step toward her, reaching my hand out to touch her shoulder. She flinched. She actually pulled her body away from me as if my touch was toxic. She pushed her heavy oak chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the polished floorboards, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. She stood up, smoothed down the front of her expensive dress, and looked right through me. She did not look at me as her husband of 4 years. She looked at me as an obstacle she needed to remove. She took a deep, shaky breath and said she was leaving. I felt a freezing spike of sheer panic shoot straight through my chest. I asked her where she was going, genuinely thinking she meant she was just leaving the dinner party because she felt ill. I asked if she wanted me to get the car and drive her home. She looked at me with absolute zero emotion, her face completely blank, and said she was not leaving the house. She was leaving our marriage. I stood there, completely paralyzed. My brain simply could not process the words she had just spoken. I looked over at my parents, fully expecting them to jump in. I expected my father to demand an explanation, to tell her she was being hysterical. I expected my mother to mediate the situation, to pull Clara aside into the kitchen and ask her what kind of stress she was under. That is what a normal family does when a marriage is falling apart in the middle of their dining room. They intervene. They offer support. They protect their own. They said absolutely nothing. My father reached for his crystal glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back down. My mother looked down at her empty plate, refusing to make eye contact with me. I turned back to Clara. My voice started to shake violently. I asked her why. I asked her how long she had been unhappy and why she never brought it up to me in couples counseling. I pleaded with her, right there in front of my silent parents, to at least give us a chance to fix whatever was fundamentally broken. Clara did not answer me. The person who answered was Felix. My younger brother leaned forward, resting his elbows firmly on the pristine white tablecloth. He looked me dead in the eye, perfectly calm, perfectly relaxed, and said they had been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months. The words hit me with the physical, brutal force of a heavy, blunt object. For half a year, the woman I shared a bed with, the woman whose car I filled with gas every Sunday morning so she wouldn't have to stop before work, the woman I was actively trying to build a family and a future with, had been sleeping with my younger brother. My own flesh and blood. I felt the blood rush out of my head so fast the room started to tilt. I thought I was going to pass out right there on my mother's expensive Persian rug. I waited for the righteous outrage. I waited for my father to stand up, grab Felix by the collar of his shirt, and physically throw him out of the house. I waited for my father to unleash the legendary, terrifying temper he used to terrorize his warehouse employees. I waited for my mother to run to my side, to hold me, to scream at Clara for bringing this absolute filth into her sacred home. But that did not happen. And what happened next is a memory that will be burned into my brain like a brand for the rest of my natural life. To truly comprehend the absolute sickness of what happened in that dining room, you have to understand the foundation of my family. Growing up in Ohio, we looked like the ultimate, perfect postcard of the American dream. We had the massive, custom-built brick house, the perfectly manicured green lawn, the 2 luxury cars sitting shiny in the driveway. My father, Victor, owned a highly successful commercial construction and hardware supply company. He built his local empire from the ground up, and he never let anyone, especially his family, Forget it. He was a brutally hard man. He firmly believed that respect was something you earned by keeping your mouth shut, working until your hands bled, and never, ever asking for a handout. He ruled our house like a strict military general. My mother, Beatrice, was the ultimate neighborhood peacekeeper, but her peace was entirely superficial and built on lies. She hosted the neighborhood meetings, baked cherry pies for the church bake sale, and smiled brightly through everything. She cared significantly more about how our family appeared to the outside world than how we actually felt on the inside. She demanded absolute perfection in public, but behind closed doors, she heavily manipulated every single situation to avoid any real conflict or accountability. And my younger brother, Felix, was her undisputed golden prince. Felix is exactly 3 years younger than me. From the exact moment he was born, the standard rules of reality and consequence simply did not apply to him. I was the eldest. I was the responsible one. I was the one who was fully expected to absorb all the pressure, all the expectations, and all the blame. When I brought home a high school report card with straight A's, my father would just nod curtly, hand it back to me, and say that was the bare minimum standard for someone living under his roof. There was no celebration. There was no praise. When Felix managed to pull a C in a basic math class he was failing miserably, my mother would bake him a massive chocolate cake, take him out for expensive ice cream, and buy him a new video game console to celebrate his supposed incredible hard work. The disparity only grew worse and much more dangerous as we got older. I remember one specific Thanksgiving vividly. I was a junior in high school. I had saved up every single penny from a brutal minimum-wage part-time job to buy myself a decent laptop for my upcoming college applications. The week before Thanksgiving, Felix got caught actively shoplifting expensive electronics from a local Walmart. The store manager called the police. Instead of letting Felix face the legal consequences of his theft, my parents panicked about their pristine reputation. My father forced me to use my hard-earned savings, my entire college fund essentially, to pay the store owner off so they wouldn't press charges and ruin Felix's permanent record. My father looked at me with cold eyes and told me that family protects family. I gave up my money. Felix didn't even have the decency to say thank you. He just smirked. When I was 16, I spent my entire summer working at my father's warehouse. I swept dirty concrete floors, loaded heavy 80-pound bags of cement into contractor trucks, and organized the dusty inventory in the sweltering, suffocating heat. I did it because my father explicitly told me I needed to learn the brutal value of $1. I worked 40 hours a week and never got a dime of allowance. But when Felix turned 16, he flat out refused to work a single day. He spent his entire summer hanging out at the local country club pool and going to parties. My parents gave him a generous weekly allowance directly from the company payroll, paying him a full salary for doing absolutely nothing. When Felix was 19, things escalated to a terrifying level. He took my father's brand new, $50,000 company truck out for a joyride after a wild frat party. He was incredibly drunk. He crashed the truck violently into a ditch, completely totaling the vehicle. If I had done that, my father would have kicked me out of the house immediately, cut me off entirely, and called the police himself to have me arrested. But when Felix did it, my mother cried hysterically and said he was just going through a tough, confusing phase. She blamed the friends he was hanging around with. My father used his high-level political connections in the town to keep the DUI off Felix's record and quietly paid for the massive property damages out of pocket. And who do you think had to work unpaid overtime at the warehouse for 6 straight months to cover the massive insurance deductible? Me. They systematically conditioned me to be the emotional and financial shock absorber for Felix. Whenever he messed up, they told me to step up and fix it. They told me family takes care of family. I foolishly believed them. I thought being the strong, reliable, stoic older brother was a badge of honor. I didn't realize it was a carefully constructed trap. I was being actively groomed to be his permanent safety net. I met Clara when I was 28 years old. She was a marketing coordinator for a local tech firm. She was sweet, soft-spoken, and seemed to genuinely appreciate how stable and grounded I was compared to the men she used to date. We dated for 3 solid years before I proposed. My parents loved her, mostly because she was exceptionally polite, dressed conservatively, and agreed with whatever my mother said during Sunday family dinners. But there were signs. Massive, glaring red flags I consciously chose to ignore because I was so incredibly desperate to build a life of my own. A life where I was finally someone's priority. The first major warning sign happened at our wedding rehearsal dinner. The entire extended family was gathered at an exclusive, expensive Italian restaurant downtown. We had just finished eating our main courses when Felix stood up to give his best man speech. He had several strong drinks in him. He grabbed the microphone, looked at Clara in her beautiful white dress, and smiled that arrogant, sickening smirk of his. He told the whole room that I was the boring, reliable, predictable guy. Then he looked right at Clara, his eyes trailing up and down her body, and said, "Clara, if you ever get tired of the predictable life and want to have some real fun, you know my number." The entire room went dead silent for a split second. I felt a surge of hot, violent anger. I was ready to stand up, grab the mic away from him, and physically throw him out of the restaurant. But then my Aunt Sylvia, my father's wealthy sister, burst out laughing. She clapped her hands loudly and said, "Oh, that Felix, he's such a charmer, always keeping us on our toes." My mother quickly joined in the laughter. Soon, half the room was chuckling, treating his blatant, disgusting disrespect like a harmless joke. I looked at Clara. She was blushing furiously, smiling down at her plate. She didn't look offended in the slightest. She looked flattered. I swallowed my pride, forced a tight smile, and let it go. That was my role. Swallow the insult. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. 2 years into our marriage, my father suffered a severe, near-fatal heart attack. He needed an emergency double bypass surgery and was strictly ordered by his doctors to step away from the business for at least a year, maybe permanently, or he would die. The family company was in a critical state. They had massive commercial contracts to fulfill, a huge payroll to meet, and a looming threat of a massive lawsuit from a major supplier over unpaid invoices. My mother called me in tears at 2 in the morning, begging me to take over. I already had a highly demanding, lucrative job as a senior project manager at a corporate engineering firm, but my mother laid the guilt on incredibly thick. She said Felix wasn't ready to lead, and if I didn't step in immediately, the family would lose everything, including their retirement, the house, and the inheritance they planned to leave us. I took a massive, career-threatening risk. I negotiated a leave of absence from my successful career and stepped in as the interim CEO of my father's failing company. I worked brutal 18-hour days. I handled angry vendors screaming at me over the phone. I painstakingly balanced the chaotic accounting books. I fired toxic employees who were stealing time, and I negotiated completely new terms to keep the company afloat. I was barely sleeping. I was never home. Clara started complaining constantly. She said I cared more about my father's business than our marriage. I tried calmly to explain that I was securing our financial future, that this was a temporary sacrifice to save the family empire so we would be taken care of. She just rolled her eyes, crossed her arms defensively, and turned her back to me in bed every single night. Then, my parents decided Felix needed to learn the ropes. They forced me to hire him as the head of regional sales, forcing me to give him a massive salary he absolutely did not earn and could not justify. Felix showed up late, left early, and spent company money taking his friends out to expensive steak lunches under the guise of networking. I was constantly cleaning up his messes. One Tuesday morning, he pulled into the company parking lot in a brand new, metallic gray Porsche 911. I confronted him immediately in the hallway outside my office. I demanded to know how he afforded a $100,000 luxury sports car when his salary couldn't cover a basic mortgage. He just laughed loudly, patted my shoulder condescendingly, and said he was just really good at saving his bonuses. I knew he was lying through his teeth. I asked Toby, a young, nervous accounting clerk who had been with the company for a year, to run a private audit on Felix's expense accounts. Toby looked absolutely terrified. He started stammering, looking over his shoulder nervously. He told me he couldn't do it. He said he saw something in the ledgers, but he couldn't tell me because he couldn't afford to lose his job and his family relied on his income. Before I could press him further, Felix walked into the office, and Toby practically ran away. I should have pushed harder. I should have investigated the books myself. But I was so completely overwhelmed with keeping the business from declaring bankruptcy that I let it slide. That was the biggest mistake of my life. The glaring signs of the betrayal were everywhere, hiding in plain sight, mocking me daily. Looking back now, I feel like an absolute gullible fool. Clara started changing her daily routines drastically. She used to leave her phone lying around on the kitchen counter, screen facing up, notifications buzzing loudly for anyone to see. Suddenly, it was always tightly secured in her pocket, or placed face down on the table, locked with a new, complex passcode. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she would lock the screen instantly, jump nervously, and hide the phone under a pillow. She started going to the gym for 2 solid hours every single evening, claiming she needed to relieve stress. But she never came home sweaty. Her clothes were clean, and her makeup was always perfectly intact. Felix started dropping by our house unannounced during the middle of the day. He claimed he was just in the neighborhood meeting prospective clients and wanted to check on his sister-in-law since I was working such crazy hours. I was usually at the office, drowning in paperwork, trying to save my father's legacy from ruin. One Saturday, I came home early from a site visit. The meeting with the contractors had been canceled last minute due to a permit issue. I parked my truck quietly in the driveway and walked in through the garage. I heard hushed, intense whispers coming from the kitchen. I walked in and saw Felix standing entirely too close to Clara. Her back was pressed tightly against the kitchen island, and he had his hand resting intimately on the marble counter right next to her hip. He was leaning in, speaking very softly into her ear. They sprang apart the second I cleared my throat. Clara's face flushed deep crimson. Felix quickly grabbed a green apple from the fruit bowl, tossed it in the air casually, and acted perfectly normal. He said he was just asking Clara for advice on a birthday gift for our mother. I looked at Clara. I asked her point blank why she looked so guilty. She immediately went on the defensive offensive. She called me paranoid. She started yelling, saying that the extreme stress of the family business was making me crazy and that I was pushing her away with my insane, unfounded jealousy. She gaslighted me so effectively, twisting the entire narrative until I genuinely believed I was the villain, that I actually ended up apologizing to her. I bought her a diamond tennis bracelet the very next day to make up for my terrible behavior. I paid for the jewelry that I would later find out she wore while sleeping with my brother in cheap hotel rooms. Which brings us right back to that terrible night. My father's 60th birthday dinner. The moment the mask fell off completely and the monsters revealed themselves. When Felix casually admitted that he had been sleeping with my wife for 6 months, the reality of the situation hit me like a runaway freight train. 6 months. That covered Thanksgiving. That covered Christmas. That covered the extremely expensive anniversary trip I took Clara on to Aspen, where she spent half the time texting on her phone, claiming she was dealing with a severe marketing crisis at work. All those times Felix patted me on the back and called me the best brother in the world. All those times Clara kissed me goodnight and told me she loved me. It was all a disgusting, calculated, vile lie. The air in the formal dining room felt completely suffocating. I stood there, looking at the faces of my family. My father, Victor, the man who aggressively preached loyalty, honor, and strict family values his entire life, was sitting there telling me to handle this like an adult. He actually looked me in the eye, took a breath and said, "Julian, you and Clara have been having serious problems for a long time. You can't possibly expect a young woman to stay loyal when you're never home. Felix was just there for her when she was lonely. You need to take some responsibility for this mess." I felt a blinding, white-hot rage building in the center of my chest. My vision actually blurred at the edges. I looked at my mother. She was standing right next to Clara, gently stroking her hair as if Clara were a victim. My mother looked at me with fake, crocodile tears in her eyes and said, "We didn't want to tell you like this, sweetie. We wanted to wait until after the birthday weekend. But they really have a deep spiritual connection. You have to understand, Felix has never felt this way about anyone before. He's finally settling down and maturing. You're strong, Julian. You'll get through this. You always do. Just don't make this harder than it has to be on everyone else. They expected me to just take it. They expected me to absorb this world-shattering betrayal, force a smile, and help them sweep it under the rug so we could cut the birthday cake and pose for family photos. They truly believed I was that broken, that completely subservient to their needs, that I would accept my own wife being passed to my brother like a hand-me-down toy. Felix leaned forward, resting his elbows firmly on the table. He gave me that same arrogant, infuriating smirk he had at my wedding. "Look, man," Felix said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy and absolute condescension. "I know it hurts. I really do. But she chose me. We're in love. Don't make a huge scene and ruin Dad's birthday over this." I didn't think. I didn't plan it. My body just reacted purely on primal instinct. I took 2 fast steps forward, grabbed Felix by the collar of his expensive, custom-tailored silk shirt, pulled him violently up from his chair, and drove my right fist squarely into his jaw with absolutely everything I had in me. The sound of the impact echoed sharply through the large room. Felix went crashing backward, taking his heavy dining chair down with him. He hit the hardwood floor incredibly hard, blood immediately pooling at the corner of his mouth from a split lip. Clara screamed at the top of her lungs, covering her face. My mother shrieked my name in absolute horror. My father jumped up, his face beat red with fury, and grabbed my arm forcefully. "What the hell is wrong with you?" my father roared, spitting as he spoke. "In my house? You assault your own brother in my house." I ripped my arm violently out of his grip. I looked down at Felix, who was holding his bleeding mouth, looking genuinely shocked that his lifelong punching bag had finally hit back. I looked at Clara, who was cowering against the wall, looking at me like I was a terrifying monster. Then I looked at my parents. I felt a strange, icy calm wash over me. The burning rage was gone, completely replaced by absolute, crystal-clear clarity. "I am done," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, cutting cleanly through the chaos in the room. "You are not my family anymore. None of you." I turned around and walked out the front door. The cold October air hit my face, and for the first time in my 35 years of life, I took a deep breath that belonged entirely to me. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and drove away, leaving the entire burning wreckage of my life behind. But the nightmare wasn't over. The next day, the true, horrifying depth of the betrayal was revealed. I received a phone call from my Aunt Sylvia. I answered, foolishly thinking she was calling to offer support, to tell me how horrified she was by what happened at the dinner. Instead, she told me that I shouldn't be so dramatic and sensitive. She told me that she had actually known about Felix and Clara for months. In fact, she calmly admitted that she had let them use her private vacation cabin by the lake for their romantic weekend getaways. She said she did it because she felt genuinely sorry for Felix, that he had always lived in my successful shadow and had finally found someone who made him truly happy. My own aunt actively facilitated the affair. She handed them the keys to her cabin so they could sleep together behind my back. The rot in my family went deeper than I could have ever imagined. They were all completely complicit. The weeks that immediately followed the birthday dinner were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I didn't go back to the beautiful suburban house I had bought with my hard-earned money. I knew it was permanently tainted. I stayed at a cheap, run-down motel on the bleak edge of town, trying desperately to figure out my next move. Clara didn't even bother returning to our house either to pack properly. 2 days after the confrontation, I received a cold, brief text message from her saying she had packed her bags and moved in with Felix. They were living in the luxury guest suite of my parents' massive house. My mother and father had actually opened their doors to my cheating wife and their golden child, providing them a safe haven and cooking them breakfast while I was sitting in a dingy motel room staring at a water-stained ceiling. My phone rang constantly. My mother left tearful, manipulative voicemails, not to apologize to me, but to beg me to be the bigger person. She said the family was being torn apart by my stubbornness and that I was ruining their pristine reputation in the community because people were starting to ask questions. My father left aggressive, angry messages, threatening to cut me out of his will completely, threatening to fire me permanently from the company, and demanding I come back to the office immediately to finish the quarterly tax filings because absolutely nobody else knew how to do it. They literally wanted me to endure the ultimate humiliation, swallow my pride, and still do their corporate bookkeeping so they wouldn't face massive IRS penalties. I didn't answer a single call. I blocked all their numbers. I hired the most aggressive, ruthless divorce lawyer in the city, a man named Harrison. I walked into his high-rise office, laid out the miserable facts, and told him I wanted absolutely everything I was legally entitled to. Harrison was a shark in a tailored suit. He smelled blood in the water instantly. He immediately filed for a fault-based divorce. Because Clara had voluntarily abandoned the marital home to live openly with her paramour, and because I had secured text messages proving the infidelity timeline, we had massive legal leverage. I forced the immediate sale of our suburban real estate, liquidating the asset and taking my full half of the equity in cold, hard cash. I legally secured my entire 401k and the investment portfolios I had built entirely with my own salary. Clara tried to fight for alimony in court, crying to the judge that she was used to a certain high standard of living and that she had put her career on hold for me. Harrison legally destroyed her in mediation, bringing up the documented timeline of the affair and proving she was fully financially supported by Felix now. The judge agreed entirely. She walked away with absolutely nothing but her clothes and a fraction of the joint checking account. But during the intense financial discovery phase of the divorce, Harrison uncovered something else. Something that made my blood run incredibly cold. We had to subpoena the financial records of my father's company to untangle some joint assets Clara claimed were hers. While reviewing the ledgers late one night, I noticed a massive, glaring discrepancy in the vendor payout accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled out to a mysterious shell LLC over the past 12 months. I did some aggressive digging through public records and realized the LLC was registered under a fake name, but the routing numbers trace back to a private bank account owned by Felix. But Felix wasn't smart enough to cook the corporate books on his own. He barely knew how to use basic accounting software. He had to have an inside man in the accounting department. I looked closely at the signature on the fraudulent expense approvals. It belonged to Marcus. Marcus was the senior accountant for the company. He was also my best friend since college. He was the guy who stood right next to me as a groomsman at my wedding. I drove straight to Marcus's house the next morning. I didn't knock. I waited in my car for him to step out to get his morning paper, and I confronted him right on his front lawn. He looked absolutely terrified. He broke down almost immediately, crying like a child. He confessed that Felix had discovered a severe, illegal mistake Marcus made on his personal taxes years ago and was using it to violently blackmail him. Felix forced Marcus to siphon company funds into the shell account to keep quiet. That was exactly how Felix bought the $100,000 Porsche. That was how he was paying for expensive dinners, diamond jewelry for my wife, and luxury hotel rooms. He was stealing directly from our father's company, actively bankrupting the family legacy, and my best friend was helping him do it. I could have gone to the police right then. I could have gone to my father, slammed the evidence on his mahogany desk, and exposed them both. But I realized something crucial. If I told my father, he would just cover it up. He would protect Felix at all costs, fire Marcus quietly with a severance package, and probably find a way to blame the massive financial loss on me since I was the interim CEO on paper. He would say I was a negligent manager. So I did something much more dangerous. I stayed completely silent. I meticulously gathered copies of every single fraudulent invoice, every bank transfer, and every forged signature. I put them in a highly secure safety deposit box at a private bank. I decided to let Felix keep stealing. I decided to let him hang himself with his own rope. I packed whatever fit into the trunk of my car and moved 300 miles away to a completely different city. I changed my phone number. I deleted all my social media accounts. I completely vanished from their lives like a ghost in the night. With my impressive corporate resume and the undeniable success I had turning my father's company around during his illness, I quickly landed an exclusive interview with Mr. Harrington. He was the CEO of a massive, multi-state commercial development corporation. It was the kind of company that could buy my father's business with pocket change and shut it down just for fun. Mr. Harrington was a sharp, no-nonsense leader. He saw my potential, my drive, and my absolute hunger immediately. He hired me as a senior director of corporate acquisitions. For the next 4 years, I poured every single ounce of my pain, betrayal, and white-hot anger into my work. I didn't date. I barely slept. I became a relentless corporate machine. I negotiated multi-million-dollar real estate deals, streamlined corporate operations, and became Mr. Harrington's most trusted executive. I worked my way up the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency, eventually earning a massive promotion to the title of regional vice president. I had my own corner office with a stunning view of the city skyline, a massive salary that made my father's wealth look like pocket money, and total, unchecked authority over regional buyouts, bankruptcies, and liquidations. I rebuilt my life in absolute silence. My family thought I had run away to lick my wounds. They thought I was a broken, defeated man hiding in the shadows while they lived happily ever after in their twisted, toxic little bubble. But I wasn't hiding. I was climbing. I was building a massive, untouchable empire, waiting patiently for the inevitable day their house of cards collapsed under the weight of Felix's incredible greed. And that day was coming much faster than any of them realized. The storm they created was about to make landfall, and they had absolutely no idea that I was the one controlling the weather. For years passed in absolute, unbroken silence. For years of waking up early, working until my bones ached, and building a life brick by brick from the ashes of my past. During those 4 years, I did not check my family's social media. I did not ask mutual acquaintances how they were doing. I did not drive past my childhood neighborhood when I returned to Ohio for corporate business. When you decide to cut toxic people out of your life, it cannot be a temporary stunt. It has to be a permanent, unyielding boundary. You have to treat the relationship like a closed book that you have no intention of ever reading again. In those 4 years, my professional life exploded in ways my father Victor could have never dreamed of. Through sheer determination, strategic real estate acquisitions, and relentless work ethic, I proved my worth to Mr. Harrington. When the regional leadership seat opened up at our corporate headquarters, Mr. Harrington didn't even interview external candidates. He walked into my glass-walled office, tossed a thick leather binder on my desk, and named me Regional Vice President of Acquisitions and Liquidations. I was no longer just managing construction projects or fixing inventory sheets for a small supply company in Ohio. I was managing a multi-hundred-million-dollar portfolio. I had a team of top-tier analysts, a corner office overlooking the city skyline, and the authority to approve or deny massive corporate bailouts, buyouts, and property liquidations across 3 states. I had built an empire, not to rub it in my family's face, but to prove to myself that my worth was never dependent on their approval. Meanwhile, back in my hometown, the house of cards my family built was crumbling under the weight of Felix's incredible arrogance and my father's willful blindness. It started with small rumors in the industry. Vendors I used to work with began reaching out to my corporate office, not knowing I was connected to the company, asking if I knew what was happening with Carter Supply. Felix had taken over full operational control after my father officially retired. And just as I predicted, Felix treated the family business like his personal piggy bank and playground. He didn't care about inventory turnover. He didn't care about vendor relationships that had taken 30 years to build. He hired his unqualified drinking buddies into high-paying management positions, turning the warehouse into a social club. He signed wildly risky, high-interest credit lines to fund aggressive expansions he didn't understand. And worst of all, he promised massive shipments of specialized commercial materials to major regional contractors that he simply could not deliver on schedule. My father, too proud to admit he had handed his life's work to an incompetent fraud, ignored the warning signs. Whenever vendors complained, Victor defended Felix. Whenever accountants raised red flags, Victor told them to fix it. He let Felix run wild because admitting Felix was a failure meant admitting that he had destroyed his relationship with me for nothing. Then came the killer blow. A major commercial general contractor filed a massive, multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuit against Carter Supply after Felix defaulted on a critical steel and timber delivery for a downtown high-rise project. The damages demanded in the lawsuit were enough to wipe out the company's entire cash reserve, freeze their bank accounts, and force them into immediate liquidation. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a quarterly budget report. My executive assistant, Elena, pressed the intercom button on my desk phone. "Mr. Carter." Elena's crisp, professional voice echoed through the speaker. "I apologize for interrupting, but there is an Elaine Carter on line 2. She is being very persistent. She claims she is your mother and says it is a life-or-death family emergency." I froze. My hand hovered over the phone for a long, heavy moment. Hearing that name after 4 years felt like a sudden, freezing gust of wind in a warm room. Part of me wanted to tell Elena to hang up and block the number, but a deeper, quieter part of me needed to hear what was on the other side of that silence. I picked up the receiver and pressed the button for line 2. "This is Julian," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth or emotion. "Julian." My mother's voice came through the speaker, sounded fragile, small, and broken. It was not the confident, controlling voice of the woman who ruled the neighborhood board or comforted my cheating wife. She sounded old. "Julian, oh thank God. I didn't know if this was really your direct line." "Why are you calling my office, Beatrice?" I asked, deliberately using her first name instead of Mom. I heard a sharp intake of breath on her end. She started crying immediately, that familiar, heavy sobbing she used whenever she wanted to manipulate a situation. "Julian, please don't be cold with me. Your father is in terrible trouble. The family is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I leaned back in my executive leather chair, staring out at the rain slicking the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The business," she sobbed into the receiver. "There's a massive lawsuit. The banks have frozen the operational accounts. The suppliers won't extend any more credit. Your brother tried so hard, Julian, he really did. But he didn't know what he was doing with those large commercial contracts." I almost laughed out loud. The sheer absurdity of her sentence was astounding. "Felix didn't know what he was doing?" I said, my tone dripping with quiet ice. "That was glaringly obvious to everyone in the industry 4 years ago. It was obvious to everyone except the 2 people who kept handing him responsibility like a shiny new toy." "Julian, please," she begged, her voice rising in panic. "We need your help. You know the vendors. You understand the complex contracts. Your father said if anyone in the world has the skill and the connections to restructure the debt and negotiate with the contractors, it's you." I caught the detail instantly. "Dad said that?" I asked quietly. There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the line. I could hear her shifting nervously. "Well," she stammered, "he knows it in his heart. He's very stressed right now. His heart condition is acting up again." Of course, Victor hadn't said it directly. His toxic pride was still sitting firmly beside him, even as the walls of his empire were actively burning to the ground around his head. I closed the financial binder on my desk. "Where is Felix?" I asked smoothly. Beatrice hesitated again, her breathing becoming shallow. He and Clara are having severe problems." The sentence hung heavily in the air between us. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. "What kind of problems, Beatrice?" "Please don't sound like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Like what? Like you're glad." "I am not glad," I said, speaking with absolute truth. "I am completely unsurprised." "What happened?" My mother let out a shaky sigh. "Clara left him, Julian. She packed her things 3 weeks ago, took their 3-year-old son, Noah, and moved across the country to stay with her sister. She filed for divorce. Clara, the woman who had blown up my marriage, betrayed her vows, and slept with my brother, had now abandoned Felix the exact moment the money ran out and the luxury lifestyle vanished. History has a brutally cruel, poetic sense of humor. Felix had stolen my wife, thinking he was winning a prize, only to realize he had inherited a fair-weather partner who jumped ship at the first sign of financial storm. "I am sorry for the child," I said honestly. A 3-year-old boy named Noah, my nephew, a child I had never met and never seen a photo of because I had scrubbed them from my life. He is the only innocent person in that house. "Felix is completely destroyed, Julian," my mother whimpered. "He barely leaves his room. He's drinking heavily. He lost his wife, he's losing his son, and now the business is dying. What do you want from us? What do we have to do?" "What do you want from me, Beatrice?" I countered, my voice hardening. "Come home," she pleaded frantically. "Come back to Ohio. Talk to your father. Use your position to talk to the banks. Help us save the business. Help your brother get back on his feet so he can fight for custody of his son." "No." The word came out of my mouth so cleanly, so effortlessly, that it caught even me by surprise. There was no hesitation, no internal debate, no lingering guilt, just a firm, impenetrable wall. My mother stopped crying for half a second, completely stunned. "Julian, no? You haven't even thought about it. You haven't even asked what the terms would be." "I have thought about it for 4 solid years," I said calmly. "That business was my father's life work, and he handed the steering wheel directly to Felix after throwing me into the dirt." "He didn't throw you away," she shrieked defensively. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my mahogany desk. "Mom, listen to yourself. You let my cheating wife and my betraying brother live in your guest suite after they admitted to an affair in front of the whole family. You stroked her hair and comforted her while I stood there in your dining room watching my marriage disintegrate. Dad blamed me for her cheating. Then you all put on your finest clothes, went to their wedding, and posted photos online talking about how love finds a way. Do not rewrite history now just because you need my brain and my bank account to save you from your own stupidity." The line went dead quiet. For once in her entire life, Beatrice Carter had absolutely nothing to say. The silence was absolute. "We made mistakes," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mistakes." I scoffed at the word. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk at the grocery store. Sleeping with your brother's wife for 6 months is a calculated betrayal. Choosing the betrayer and abandoning the victim is a conscious decision. You made your choices, Beatrice. Now you have to live with the consequences. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us?" She sobbed silently. "I already forgave you," I answered truthfully. I heard a sharp gasp of hope on her end. "You did?" "Yes," I finished coldly. "I forgave you years ago so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of your toxicity anymore. But forgiveness does not mean access. It does not mean a bailout. It does not mean family. Do not call my office again." I hung up the phone without waiting for a response. My heart was beating slightly faster than usual, but there was no panic. There was no overwhelming grief. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit, opened my binder, and went back to work. I thought that call would be the end of it. I thought my refusal would send a clear enough message even for them to understand. But people who have spent their entire lives benefiting from your lack of boundaries rarely respect your boundaries the first time you enforce them. They view your boundaries as an insult, a challenge to be broken. Exactly 1 week later, my brother Felix showed up at my corporate headquarters. I didn't know he was in the building initially. I was sitting in the executive boardroom, leading a high-stakes acquisition meeting with 2 major real estate investors and Mr. Harrington himself. The boardroom had floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the main corporate hallway. In the middle of my presentation, I saw a commotion through the glass. A man was arguing loudly with my assistant, Elena, at the reception desk. He looked disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled and ill-fitting, as if he had lost weight rapidly. His hairline was receding, his face was pale and puffy, and he lacked the polished, arrogant posture he used to carry. Took me 3 full seconds to realize it was Felix. Elena was politely but firmly pointing toward the elevators, telling him to leave. But Felix raised his voice, pushed past her, and marched directly toward the glass boardroom. He slammed his hand against the glass door, causing the investors to jump in their seats. "Julian," Felix shouted, his voice muffled through the glass. "I know you're in there. Stop ignoring your family." Mr. Harrington frowned, looking from the glass door to me. "Julian, who is this man? Do you need me to call corporate security?" I felt a brief flash of embarrassment, but I quickly suppressed it. I stood up slowly, adjusted my tie, and looked at the investors calmly. "I apologize profusely for this interruption, gentlemen. Please give me 5 minutes to handle an unexpected personal matter. The coffee and pastries are at the back sideboard." I walked out of the boardroom, shutting the glass door firmly behind me. Felix was standing in the middle of the carpeted hallway, breathing heavily, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Elena was right behind him, holding a phone, looking extremely distressed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter," Elena said quickly. He claimed he had an urgent appointment, and before I could verify, he forced his way past the security desk downstairs. "It's fine, Elena," I said softly, keeping my composure completely intact. "Please call corporate security right now and have 2 officers come up to the 20th floor. Felix's jaw dropped. The arrogant smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. "Are you serious?" Felix sneered, stepping closer to me. "You're going to call security on your own brother?" I stopped 3 feet away from him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cross my arms. I just stood there, towering over him in my tailored vice president suit, looking down at him with complete, unyielding authority. "You walked into my corporate workplace uninvited, disrupted a multi-million-dollar board meeting, and harassed my staff," I said, my voice dead level. "You are lucky I am only calling security and not the police." Felix scoffed, trying desperately to summon his old, superior attitude, but it cracked at the edges. "I needed to talk to you, Dan. You blocked Mom's phone. You blocked Dad's email. You left us with no choice." "You had plenty of choices 4 years ago, Felix," I replied coldly. "You made them. What do you want?" Felix looked around the opulent corporate hallway, staring at the marble floors, the expensive artwork on the walls, and the glass conference rooms. A look of bitter, ugly envy flashed across his eyes. "Look at you," he muttered bitterly, "living in a high-rise, wearing a $2,000 suit, playing the big corporate executive, while Dad's business is dying, while your family is drowning. I built this life with my own hands, Felix," I said softly. "I didn't steal it from anyone. I didn't cheat my way into it, and I certainly didn't steal it from my brother." Felix flinched as if I had struck him across the face. For the very first time in his life, I saw a flicker of genuine, unvarnished shame register in his eyes. It was not enough to redeem him, but it was there. "I know I messed up back then, okay?" Felix mumbled, looking down at the expensive carpet. "I know things got out of hand with Clara." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Messed up? You messed up a dinner order, Felix. You destroyed a marriage. You betrayed your brother. Do not minimize what you did to make yourself feel better. You and Clara weren't happy anyway," Felix snapped, falling back on his ancient, pathetic justification. "You were never home. I gave her what you couldn't. Do you know the difference between guilt and accountability, Felix?" I asked, stepping an inch closer to him. Felix frowned, thoroughly confused by the question. "What? Guilt is feeling bad because your life fell apart and you got caught," I explained, my words cutting like surgical scalpels. "Accountability is admitting you caused the damage before the consequences came looking for you. You don't feel guilty for hurting me. You just feel miserable because Clara took your son and left you. Dad's business is going bankrupt, and you finally ran out of people to bail you out." Felix swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Julian, please. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm saying I'm sorry. I studied his face carefully. I had imagined that exact apology for years. In my darkest, loneliest moments right after the divorce, I foolishly thought that hearing Felix say, "I'm sorry," would heal something inside me. But standing there looking at him, I realized the apology was completely worthless. It arrived attached to an invoice. He didn't come to my office because he suddenly realized the weight of his sins. He came because he was drowning and I was the only person left with a lifeboat. "What exactly are you asking for, Felix?" I demanded smoothly. Felix swallowed his pride, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "We need a loan, or a bridge line of credit. Dad thinks if you speak to the general contractor suing us, if you use your corporate title and your contacts at Harrington Development, you can convince them to drop the lawsuit or settle for pennies on the dollar. You can save Carter Supply." "No," I said instantly. "Julian, please." Felix's voice cracked, bordering on a yell. "This will completely ruin Dad. He's 64 years old. He'll lose the house. He'll lose his retirement." "Then Dad should have chosen better leadership," I replied with absolute zero remorse. "He chose his favorite son to run his company. He chose his son." Felix shouted angrily. I smiled sadly at him, a look of profound pity. "No, Felix. He didn't choose his son. He chose his favorite. And he let his favorite destroy everything he built." Felix's face twisted in rage, but before he could speak another word, the heavy double doors at the end of the hallway opened. Two tall, muscular corporate security guards in dark suits walked briskly toward us. "Mr. Carter," the lead security guard said respectfully, bowing his head slightly to me, "is this man causing a disturbance?" "Yes, heavy disturbance," I said, without taking my eyes off Felix. "Escort him off the premises immediately. If he sets foot in this building again, file a formal criminal trespassing charge." The two guards stepped up on either side of Felix, grasping his arms firmly. Felix looked at the guards, then looked back at me, his eyes wide with absolute fury and shock. "You're really going to let Dad go under?" Felix screamed as the guards began dragging him toward the elevators. "You think you're better than us now? You're a monster, Julian. You turned your back on your own family. You'll regret this when you're all alone." I stood perfectly still in the middle of the hallway, watching the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off his desperate screaming. His words echoed through the quiet corridor, but they didn't hurt me. They didn't pierce my armor like they used to, because standing there in my success, surrounded by the life I had built with my own honor and integrity, I finally understood the ultimate truth. Turning my back on them was not an act of cruelty. It was the exact act of self-preservation that saved my life. 2 weeks after Felix was forcibly thrown out of my corporate office, the final hammer dropped on Carter Supply. Without my intervention, without a massive cash infusion, and with the contractor's lawsuit freezing their assets, the company was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It wasn't even a reorganization. It was a total liquidation. Felix's life dissolved into complete chaos. Clara finalized their divorce with ruthless efficiency, obtaining full legal and physical custody of their son, Noah, along with a strict child support order that Felix couldn't possibly pay. Broke, unemployed, and stripped of his luxury Porsche, which was repossessed by the bank, Felix was forced to move into the spare bedroom of my parents' tiny rental apartment. The golden child, the man who was supposed to inherit the kingdom, was now a 32-year-old unemployed divorcee living with his broke parents. The exact family that had told me to be understanding, the family that had demanded I swallow the ultimate betrayal for the sake of peace, had been completely destroyed from the inside out by the very man they protected. I didn't celebrate the news when I heard it from industry contacts. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't send smug text messages or post triumphant updates online. True strength does not gloat over the demise of its enemies. I simply continued living my life, focusing on my work, and nurturing the peaceful world I was building. Then, on a crisp evening in late October, exactly 4 years to the day since that disastrous birthday dinner, I returned home from work. I pulled my car into the driveway of my home in Cincinnati. It wasn't a mega mansion like my father's old house, but it was a beautiful, warm, brick colonial home with maple trees lining the front lawn. As I walked up the paved walkway, I opened my mailbox to grab the evening mail. Among the utility bills and corporate circulars, one envelope caught my eye instantly. It had no return address, but I would recognize the neat, cursive handwriting on the front anywhere in the world. It was my mother's handwriting. I stood in the cool driveway for a long moment, holding the envelope in my hand. The autumn wind rustled the orange leaves in the maple trees above me. On the front porch, the front door opened, and Nora stepped out holding a mug of hot tea. Nora was the pediatric nurse I had met 2 years after my move to Cincinnati. She had soft, kind eyes, a sharp, brilliant sense of humor, and a heart completely devoid of malice. When I had first told her the short, painful story of my past on our third date, she hadn't looked at me with pity or judgment. She hadn't offered empty platitudes like, "Family is family," or "You should forgive." She had simply reached across the table, placed her warm hand over mine, and said, "That must have been incredibly lonely." In that single sentence, she had recognized my wound without demanding I hide it. We had been married for a year in a quiet, intimate ceremony surrounded by real friends and her loving family. Nora looked at me standing motionless in the driveway, noticing the white envelope in my hand. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked softly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "Yeah," I replied. "Just a letter from my mother." Nora didn't panic. She didn't demand I throw it away, nor did she push me to open it. She simply walked down the porch steps, stood beside me, and slipped her hand into mine. "Do you want to read it together?" We walked up to the porch, sat down on the wooden bench, and I opened the envelope. Inside were 4 pages of lined notebook paper, covered in my mother's tight handwriting. I began reading silently. "Dear Julian, I am writing this letter because I know you will not answer my calls, and I do not blame you. I am writing from a small kitchen table in a place that does not feel like home. Your father is asleep in the next room. He has aged 10 years in the last 6 months. Felix is out looking for work at a local auto shop. I am not writing this letter to ask you for money. We have lost the business, we have lost the house, and we are paying for our mistakes every single day. I am writing this because for the first time in my life, I am standing in the absolute wreckage of my choices, and I have to tell you the truth before I die. I was wrong, Julian. I was so terribly, horribly wrong. I protected Felix his entire life. From the day he was born, I treated him like he was fragile, and I treated you like you were indestructible. I expected you to absorb every blow, carry every burden, and forgive every insult simply because you were the strong one. I raised you to be a shield for your brother, and when he stabbed you in the back, I asked you to apologize for bleeding on my rug. When Clara cried at that birthday table 4 years ago, I walked around the table and put my arms around her. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace. I convinced myself I was protecting the family. But sitting in this small apartment, looking at what we have become, I finally see the truth. I called it peace because I was too cowardly to call it betrayal. I watched you walk out of our house that night with nothing, and I let you go. I chose comfort over justice. I chose the son who demanded constant saving over the son who had loved us quietly and faithfully his whole life. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect you to let us meet your wife or ever come home. I just needed you to know that the mother who failed you finally sees what she did. With all the love I failed to show you, Mom, I stared at that one specific line on the 3rd page for what felt like an eternity. I called it peace because I was too cowardly to call it betrayal. I read that sentence 3 times out loud to the quiet evening air. The words hung between Nora and me like a heavy bell ringing in a quiet church. For 4 long years, I had carried the anger, the confusion, and the lingering self-doubt, wondering if I had been too harsh, wondering if I had been the one who broke the family. But there it was, written in black ink by the very woman who had orchestrated the cover-up. An absolute, unvarnished admission of guilt. Nora leaned her head against my shoulder, her hand squeezing mine tightly. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. I folded the 4 pages of paper carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. "I feel lighter," I said truthfully. For the first time, the apology doesn't feel like a trap. Feels real. But real doesn't mean I have to go back. The very next day, my phone rang while I was sitting in my living room. The caller ID showed a local Ohio area code, but it wasn't my mother's number. I answered it calmly. "Julian." The voice was rough, gravelly, and raspy. It was my father, Victor. He sounded old. The booming, authoritative voice that used to strike terror into warehouse workers and command boardrooms was completely gone, replaced by the fragile tone of an aging, defeated man. "I'm here, Victor," I said quietly. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear him breathing heavily through his nose, struggling to find the words. Victor Carter had never apologized to anyone in his entire 64 years on this earth. He was a man who believed apologizing was a fatal sign of weakness. "Your mother wrote to you yesterday," Victor finally said, his voice straining. "She told me what she wrote. She meant every word of it. And I need to say something to you." Another long pause stretched between us. I waited silently, refusing to fill the space for him. "I was wrong, Julian," my father said, his voice cracking noticeably on the word wrong. I sat down on my living room sofa, holding the phone tightly to my ear. Hearing those 3 words from Victor Carter felt like watching a mountain crumble into the sea. "Felix did a monstrous thing," my father continued, his breathing ragged. "Clara did a terrible thing. And I blamed you for it. I blamed you because it was easier to get angry at you than it was to admit that my golden son had become a selfish, thieving coward that I didn't respect. I sacrificed my good son to protect my broken one. And I lost everything because of it." My throat tightened despite all my built-up armor. But I was no longer that desperate boy begging for crumbs of affection. I was a man who had built his own worth, his own family, and his own peace. "Thank you for saying that, Victor," I said, my voice steady, respectful, but completely firm. "I truly appreciate that you said it." Victor exhaled a shaky, hopeful breath. Can we see you, Julian? Can your mother and I come down to Cincinnati? Just for an hour? Just to see your face?" I looked across my warm, sunlit living room. Nora was sitting at the kitchen island, quietly reading a magazine. Through the glass back door, I could see the peaceful garden we had planted together. The home I had built was safe. It was quiet. It was completely untouched by the chaos, drama, and manipulation of my past. "No, Victor," I said softly but clearly. "We cannot." The line went dead silent. "Never?" my father whispered, his voice shattering completely. "I don't know what the distant future looks like," I answered with brutal honesty. "But I know what I need right now. And what I need is distance. What my family needs is safety. You're my son, Julian," he choked out. "I was your son 4 years ago when you sat at that birthday table and chose Felix," I replied, the words landing with absolute, undeniable weight. Victor let out a ragged sob into the phone. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't use his old manipulative threats. Because deep down in his soul, he knew I was right. He knew that the bridge hadn't been broken by my anger. It had been burned to ash by his own choices. "I understand," Victor whispered, his voice barely a breath. I hope you have a good life, Julian. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when I was too foolish to say it." "Thank you," I said softly. "I hope you and Mom find peace in your new life. Goodbye, Victor." I hung up the phone and set it down on the coffee table. I sat there in the absolute quiet of my living room for a long time. Nora walked over, sat down beside me, and gently pulled my head onto her shoulder. I wrapped my arms around her waist, and finally, the tears came. I didn't cry because I wanted them back. I didn't cry because I regretted my decision. I cried because I was finally allowing myself to mourn the parents I should have had. the parents every child deserves, but so few actually get. People often misunderstand what it means to cut toxic family members out of your life. They think it is driven by hatred. They think it is a petty act of revenge, a cold shoulder designed to punish people. But standing on the other side of that painful journey, I can tell you with absolute certainty that cutting people off has nothing to do with hatred. Sometimes, walking away is simply the ultimate act of self-love. It is the moment you finally look at the fire burning your hands and realize that you love yourself enough to stop holding the coals. 6 months after my father's phone call, Felix made one final, desperate attempt to reach me. He didn't call. He didn't show up at my office again. He knew corporate security would have him arrested immediately. Instead, he sent an email to my personal address. The subject line simply read, "Brother to brother." I sat at my home desk on a rainy Sunday afternoon, staring at the unopened email. For a brief second, I considered deleting it instantly, but curiosity won and I clicked it open. The email was long, messy, and filled with grammatical errors. Felix wrote that Clara's final divorce decree had been granted by the judge. She had taken full custody of little Noah, moved to another state entirely, and blocked Felix on all communication platforms. He wrote that he was allowed only supervised phone calls with his son once a month because he couldn't maintain a stable living situation. He wrote that he was currently working an entry-level hourly job at an auto parts warehouse, lifting heavy boxes for $12 an hour, the exact same manual labor he used to mock me for doing when we were teenagers. He confessed that losing his money, his status, his luxury car, his wife, and his son had finally forced him to look in the mirror without his parents' protection shielding him. At the very end of the email, Felix wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me, Julian. I know I destroyed your marriage. I know I ruined Dad's company. I know I acted like a monster. I just wanted you to know that for the first time in my life, I understand what I stole from you. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. You don't have to reply. Just please know I am sorry." I sat with that email for over an hour. The old version of me, the version that was trained to run to Felix's rescue every time he cried, felt a faint tug of sympathy. It is a terrifying thing to watch a human being lose everything and hit rock bottom. But the mature, healthy version of me recognized the crucial distinction. Felix's rock bottom was necessary. If he had never lost the company, if he had never lost the luxury cars and his parents' wealth, he would have continued through life steamrolling people, betraying trust, and destroying lives without a second thought. Pain was the only teacher left that was capable of breaking through his immense ego. I opened a reply window, typed out a brief, firm response, and read it twice to make sure there was no anger, no malice, but also no opening for him to return. "Felix, I accept your apology. I hope you take this rock bottom and use it to become a genuinely better man. More importantly, I hope you become a better father to your son than you were a brother to me. I hope you build a life with your own hands that does not require someone else to pay for your mistakes. I wish you healing and sobriety. But do not contact me, my wife, or my office again. Our chapter as brothers is permanently closed. Julian." I pressed send. Then, I permanently blocked his email address, emptied my trash folder, and closed my laptop. That was the absolute last time I ever heard from my brother. The consequences of their actions were absolute and complete. They didn't suffer because I launched a vengeful crusade against them. They didn't fall because I used corporate power to crush them. They fell because the universe has an unyielding, mathematical law of cause and effect. When you plant seeds of betrayal, arrogance, and greed, you cannot expect to harvest a crop of peace and prosperity. They built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, and when the wind blew, the house simply collapsed under its own weight. A year after that final email, my life blossomed into a level of joy and peace I once thought was completely impossible for someone as broken as me. Nora and I welcomed our first child into the world, a beautiful, healthy baby girl we named Lily. I will never forget the exact moment the doctor handed Lily to me in the quiet hospital room. She was so tiny, her skin so warm, resting against my chest. As I looked down at her tiny fingers curling around my thumb, a wave of profound, Overwhelming clarity washed over my entire soul. In that quiet hospital room, holding my newborn daughter, I understood the true meaning of family in a way I had never grasped before. Family is not defined by shared blood. Family is not a shared last name, an awkward holiday dinner, or pretending everything is fine while you are bleeding internally just to keep the peace. Family is not about covering up betrayals to protect an image. Family is safety. Family is fierce, unyielding protection. Family is accountability. Family is making the conscious, brave decision to stop passing your unhealed generational trauma down to the innocent children who trust you with their lives. Standing there holding Lily, I made a solemn, sacred vow to my daughter. I swore that she would grow up in a home where love was never conditional on performance. I swore she would never have to compete with a sibling for basic affection. I swore that in our house, we would never call accountability cruelty, and we would never call silence peace. 2 years later, Nora and I had a son, a bright, energetic boy named Caleb. Today, our home in Cincinnati is loud, messy, and filled with vibrant life. There are colorful toys scattered across the hallway floorboards. There are messy pancake batter spills on the kitchen counter every Saturday morning. There are bedtime stories that have to be read 3 times because Caleb always looks up with wide, brown eyes and whispers, "Again, Daddy, again." Sometimes, when I am tucking my children into their beds at night, smoothing the blankets over their shoulders, my mind briefly wanders back to my father Victor. I think about how astonishingly easy it is for a parent to destroy a child's spirit simply by choosing one over another. I think about how toxic favoritism doesn't always look like blatant hatred. Sometimes, it looks like making endless excuses for the reckless child while demanding the responsible child carry the world on his shoulders without complaining. I refuse to repeat that cycle. In our home, love means fairness. When Lily makes a mistake and hurts Caleb, we teach her to name what she did wrong and apologize sincerely. When Caleb breaks a toy, we do not blame Lily for getting upset. We teach our children that their actions have real consequences, but that our love for them is an unshakable, permanent foundation that can never be lost. A few months ago, on a warm summer evening, Nora and I were sitting on our back porch after the kids had finally fallen asleep. A soft, warm summer rain was moving gently through the tall oak trees in our yard. The night air smelled freshly washed, thick with the sweet scent of lavender from the planter boxes Nora keeps near the porch steps. Nora reached over, wrapped her fingers through mine, and looked at me thoughtfully. "Julian," she asked softly, "do you ever miss them? Do you ever miss your old family?" I looked out at the rain falling through the warm glow of our porch light. I thought about her question deeply, searching the darkest corners of my heart for an honest answer. Did I miss them? I missed the idea of them. I missed the childhood I had always pretended I had. I missed the mother who should have held me in her arms when my marriage fell apart. I missed the strong, honorable father who should have stood like a shield between me and betrayal. I missed the younger brother I used to protect before I realized that some people accept love without ever learning the basic concept of loyalty. But the actual people, the real people who asked me to sit at a dinner table with my destroyed dignity and call it family? No, I didn't miss them at all. I looked at my brilliant, loving wife, squeezed her hand tightly, and smiled. Sometimes I miss what they were supposed to be. I told her truthfully, but I love what we are. Nora smiled, leaned over, and kissed my cheek softly. "That makes perfect sense," she whispered. "And that is more than enough. That is the life I have built today. It is not a perfect life, no life ever is. But it is a life built entirely on absolute honesty, unwavering integrity, and real, healthy love. The absolute truth of my story is simple. My brother destroyed my marriage, but he did not destroy me. My parents chose him over me, but their toxic choice did not define my value as a human being. Clara betrayed her vows, but her betrayal did not make me unlovable. For a long time, I foolishly thought that losing my family meant I had lost my place in the world. But really, losing them gave me the sacred opportunity to build a vastly better world of my own making. So, When people ask me whether I regret cutting my family off forever, I look them straight in the eye and tell them the absolute truth. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that my parents forced me to choose between loving them and protecting my own mental sanity. I regret that my brother turned my lifelong loyalty into a weapon to stab me in the back. But I do not regret walking away for a single second. Because the exact day I cut them off forever was the day I finally stopped begging people to value me. It was the day I stopped calling toxic pain family loyalty. It was the day I finally stepped into the light and became a free man. And sometimes, true freedom looks like an empty chair at Thanksgiving. Sometimes it looks like a permanently blocked phone number. Sometimes it looks like complete silence after years of being told to keep the peace at all costs. But for me, freedom looks like my wife laughing in our warm kitchen. It looks like my 2 beautiful children running barefoot through our hallway. It looks like a home where nobody ever has to earn love by swallowing abuse. And it looks like a life built far, far away from the people who taught me exactly what a family should never, ever be. My parents chose my brother after he destroyed my marriage, so I cut them off forever. And in the end, that was the exact choice that saved my life. Thank you so much for taking this long, painful, but ultimately healing journey with me today. Storytelling is the way we process our deepest wounds, and sharing my truth with you means more than words can express. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever had to set hard boundaries with toxic people, or if you are currently struggling to find the courage to walk away from a situation that is breaking your heart, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Please share your story, your thoughts, or your personal journey of healing in the comments below. Reading your experiences reminds all of us that we are never truly alone in our pain. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember that you are always worthy of a love that honors you.